everybody. Today we're going to look at my process of commenting student papers at Princeton. We're going to look at Eugene's paper. He's a student in my first year writing seminar, Living with AI, and he volunteered to do this. I think he's going to do kind of a complimentary reaction video, so there will be a link obviously to that. I wanted to do this for a few reasons. The first is that in Princeton's program we give kind of an immense amount of feedback, and it can be cool to see how that plays out. Secondly is give a behind the scenes. How does commenting and grading happen in a college context in a place like Princeton? I can offer you at least what I do. And then finally, I have been doing this for a while. I taught this advanced research writing for 5 years at Carnegie Mellon, and this is my third year at Princeton, and so I'd like to kind of share my approach and how I try to help students. I'm speaking for myself here, not on behalf of the Princeton Writing Program. Our writing seminar, the Living with AI one, is one of a number of sections that students can choose, and each one has its own strengths, personalities. So this is from ours. So we're going to look at 2 out of 3 parts that each student gets for each draft that they turn in. The first one is we're going to read through Eugene's paper and offer him some comments. And then the second piece is that once we get to the end of it, conclusion, nothing so far, that'll be fun to read. The second piece is that we're going to write a response letter to Eugene that kind of synthesizes and summarizes some of those, and that'll be this video. The third piece will be meeting with Eugene, and since we're toward the end of the semester, that'll be in kind of a small group context. And yeah, so that is how this plays out. Before we get into Eugene specifically, I want to give a little bit of context for the class. So here's kind of our whole semester on a one-page view, and in our first unit it was very structured. We all did versions of the same project, which was about bias in AI. And you can see the rough schedule is that you have about 2 weeks and then a draft, 2 weeks, and then the revision of that is due, and that's the one that is kind of graded for a letter grade. Then we have another 2 weeks into Unit 2, draft, 2 weeks and a bit for the revision, which is the graded one of the second unit, and then more or less the same thing. We've had a little bit more than 2 weeks to work on this third project. We're at the draft right now, and even though it looks like it's 3 weeks, that's only 2 weeks before the semester will be over and Eugene will kind of turn in his final project. So that is at a very high level what we've been up to. When I come to each student paper, I kind of reload and refresh what I remember about their process so far. The fun part about our final Unit 3 project is that it is something that they've totally designed themselves. So let me show you kind of my context for understanding Eugene's project. I often call this style of grading, I call it grading, but if you look at our grading policy, it's actually, this only counts as a homework grade. Eugene won't get kind of a full letter grade until the final R3. So students' workflow is to, when they're ready, we have a shared Google Drive, and you click into it, and this is where students will share all of their homework, and that builds up to the draft. So the core part there is that it's actually very collaborative because it's shared among all the students, and students can click in and see each other's if they want to. We also provide a lot of samples from past students. And brief funny story, I one time in my first semester at Princeton accidentally uploaded my own comments back into the shared folder, and then we had this kind of large conference in-class workshop, and it was just like pulling teeth trying to get students to contribute, and eventually I finally realized that it was because they had already seen my comments and they were treating it as like, oh well, that's the answer then, so what more is there to say? So ever since then, students put things in there, but then we all will give comments kind of outside of the scope of the Google Drive so that when we come together, it makes more sense. So in this final unit, we have space to build in 4, we call them pre-drafts in the writing program. And so for Eugene's first pre-draft, this is what he put together, and it's basically flesh out 2 ideas of what you could do for your project. And his second idea, I think, was more or less kind of a throwaway one, but the first one was, he said, maybe I'll do a research project about music and something about Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, and we basically played that out, and I think he decided that wasn't interesting enough for himself. So then we came in to our next pre-draft, and this one is the research proposal, and textually it's very short, essentially. It's about a page and a half. But this is the one where students have to lock in what their project is. So it was from here that I knew what Eugene, kind of was going to start building toward in the draft. And Eugene's actually in a special spot, which is that he had a pretty interesting second project. And so that one was about broadly a theme of self-driving cars, and Eugene had selected some tweets that I had chosen that students could analyze, and he had begun analyzing those. And so here we see that he began his proposal. He says, yeah, I would like to, I had kind of offered to him, if you really want to, I'm open to you continuing. You might think that that would make for an easy paper, but I think in a way it's the most advanced students who choose to do that because it shows kind of commitment to the same project, and you're willing to take it that much further. So he wants to extend his Unit 2 project, and at the tail end he had said, he had kind of coined his own term, which was that people in the tweets care more about Tesla as a kind of company than they do about Tesla's self-driving car technology itself. And so Eugene's saying maybe we should re-envision something that he'll call holistic technological feasibility. And so the rest of this proposal is kind of playing out what he wants to do to build on that Unit 2 project. And it was a successful Unit 2 project. And essentially, the big piece is he wants to collect his own tweets across 1-month increments. So I had only given them 2. Yeah, in fact, he says, look, like you only gave me a few tweets bound by the keywords Tesla and safety, and he's going to kind of elaborate on that quite a bit. Yeah, so from there, it was kind of full steam ahead, and so we had 2 more pre-drafts. So I approved this project. We had 2 more pre-drafts, and those are kind of puzzle pieces that are building toward this draft. In fact, I won't be surprised if some of the text that Eugene wrote in his next 2 pre-drafts are kind of emerging here. That was kind of the whole point. So our next one, I called it a search journal, and the new skill in Unit 3 here, sorry this intro is going on so long, like why can't we just get to Eugene's stuff? We will in a second. I think the context will be useful because otherwise it'll feel like Eugene's project just popped out of nowhere, and I really want to emphasize that this is a step-by-step process. So we're going through it. You can click ahead if you want to. I'd say probably 5 more minutes until we get to Eugene's actual paper. The idea of the search journal is that this is the first time in the semester where they have to find scholarly sources kind of starting from scratch. And I worked with our course librarian at Princeton. Each writing seminar is paired with a librarian, so shout out to Anu, our course librarian, and she worked with students in class that day, and she and I kind of designed this assignment together. And the idea is that the first search terms that you start with are maybe not actually going to be as helpful as you think. And so this has a process where finding one paper leads to other papers, which sometimes even lead to other papers, and so on. So that's the idea. It'll be interesting to see if Eugene pulled from any of the scholarship that we did in Unit 2. I think when we flipped all the way down here, he kind of ran out of time and didn't end up with a works cited, which is too bad because that would have been easy for me to see, is he drawing on that? And so then he kind of has some revised terms and so on. And then I asked students to kind of describe some things at the end. You can see I gave a little bit of comments, and what I really like about Eugene's approach, and this is from maybe a week ago, is that he's really tapped into doing this project from the perspective of a specific discipline, in this case HCI, or human-computer interaction. And yeah, I kind of gave him a little bit of commentary which is on my mind. In other words, I think because his analysis is so advanced, we'll want to be really thoughtful about how he's positioning this for other kind of, real readers. All right, and then we got into, this one is kind of with a grade attached, not just a homework grade, and this is Eugene writing up his data. So this is a big push for students. This was due just earlier this week, and the idea is that Eugene is getting some of the text out of his background section, so I'm probably going to see exactly that. And then a very early version of his analysis. And you can see already he's doing so much work that it's going to be really easy to plug into his full draft, which we'll see in a minute. And yeah, so this is what I know of Eugene's project kind of going in. And now we come back to his actual paper. So that's our context. My usual process is I sit on the couch and kind of do a lot of these back to back, because it's a very compressed timeline for myself, not just for the students. So I've already commented on a few this morning, and we're going into Eugene's. You'll see that Eugene's starts here with a little letter, and this is something that the Princeton Writing program does. I've grown to really enjoy it. It's a chance to kind of connect with the student on a more human level. So that's my primary goal, is to just affirm, like, yes, this is tough, this is cool, interesting, challenging. All the emotion words that scholarly writing doesn't really have space for. The other thing is that I've been teaching this style of thing for a long time, and each year, each semester, I kind of make a little bit of tweaks. So my tweak this time is that I have been maintaining some scraps, which are kind of useful snippets for myself, and the scraps here are snippets that I can generally kind of apply. So in this case, kind of we can even get started, because Eugene turned in a PDF version as well. If we click into it, we can see it's more or less the same. The big thing is that there's more beautiful formatting here on the figures. Yeah, much more beautiful. So that's going to be kind of great to know. And so I'm going to comment here on his right at the beginning. I use text shortcuts here. So I set a special shortcut within Word, and I'm just going to paste that. Thanks for the PDF. I'm commenting here, but looking there for visual aspects. So honestly, I've already looked there, and so, now I have. So that's true. I have tried to make this essentially as large as I can. In case people are watching on their phone, I hope this is at least visible. Yeah, I would normally have this kind of much smaller so that I could have it all in the same space. But we're going to do what we can here. All right, thank you for taking the time. So I prompt students with what to write in their letter, and kind of the first paragraph is like, give me your own recap of what you're doing in the paper. And that way I can kind of match that up. And also, since it's the letter and I'm just kind of commenting on things, I can more comment on where things are at. So for instance, I show that there's a high degree of variation in user sentiment from month to month, and I'm going to say, cool. And he's still working with the same term, holistic technological feasibility. I do have thoughts on that. I'm trying to decide, do I preview those here? I think I'm just going to roll with it. We're going to have more than enough to comment on for Eugene's. So normally I would allocate about an hour for these two steps of commenting and then writing my response letter. That varies a little bit based on how in-depth each student's project is, and sometimes in Unit 3, because I kind of release students to write a little bit longer, it takes a little bit longer. So, I'm also commenting. We're just going to see how this goes. So I could tell Eugene is tired. My goal was just to get all the pieces of this data analysis done. I'm thrilled that it all worked out. Yeah, so happy that you got Twitter API access. So this is the real new piece for Eugene. He had ideas. He had the ambition of doing this same kind of technique in Unit 2. I told him, like, hey, if you want to kind of upgrade your evidence then, you're welcome to, or you can wait till Unit 3. He was like, I'm going to try it, and it basically just took a long time for him to get programmatic access to Twitter's API, but now he has huge amounts at his disposal. This literature review will be extremely ambitious as my project really has no direct comparison, and that is a big challenge, actually. Yeah, so notice he's feeling a bit stuck in terms of discipline, and I'm actually going to comment here about that to just get him set up straight. I mean, my kind of assumption, we'll have to see in Eugene's video, but my assumption is that students read these through themselves in the same way I kind of myself comment in order. And so I'm trying to be kind of thoughtful of their reading experience. So I want to just get him started and let him know early on, yeah, this will be one of the central challenges for this project. I'll be sure to pay attention to how it plays out in the draft. I think that's fine. All right, and he says, I've restructured a lot of his stuff from Unit 2, and basically he already knows that he needs to do a lot. I mean, that's not surprising. We already kind of saw that his conclusion is just the header. Yeah, so we're gonna go in from here. There we go. Let's see Eugene's paper. I do want to see the word count. I think on paper there's a word limit of maybe 2,500 words. I tell my students that I will not enforce that unless they get to something ridiculous like 6,000 words. But we can see down here that there's almost 3,800 words. That includes his cover letter, so, you know, subtract some off. He's probably looking at, like, I don't know, 3,200 words right now or something. So I'm just going to mention to him to include a word count. I already have a snippet drafted there. And you'll see I do use keyboard shortcuts quite a bit. I don't know if you know, if you're on a Mac, you can do Command and then the backtick button. It's right below the tilde, right next to the 1, and that will swap you between windows of the same application. So I'm in Word and I'm in Word, so I can just use the backtick there, and then I use Command-C and Command-V for a copy and paste. Assessing user trust over time in autonomous vehicles and exploration on contributors to user trust, great, and holistic technological feasibility. This is a really nicely done title because it has both the term that everyone will know of user trust and Eugene's own personal contribution here of holistic technological feasibility. So he's kind of sneaking it in, and that is working really well. Let me see if I have any snippets here. Yeah, I'm just going to pull the first half of this of just kind of affirming this title. And in his case, it's also getting to the thesis. My rule of thumb, not rule of thumb, but my kind of goal is to give maybe 1 to 2 comments within each section. So we'll give like 1 comment on the abstract. Usually the introduction is a little bit more dense, so might give more comments there, and just kind of try to spread this out. Yeah, I think we're good. So the abstract is a new piece. We have not done that until now. We had kind of a classroom exercise to have the abstract, so that way it's not something they're pulling out of nowhere in the revision, like let's get it here even in the draft. And I will read it, but these change so much that I am kind of not worried about the text itself. It's more about getting the practice. So, right. The other thing I want to mention is that we have also been working with kind of a shared set of vocabulary. So the Princeton Writing program has what it calls a writing lexicon, and I have kind of my own personal version of that, which is kind of distilling some of the research writing elements down to 4 aspects. And so I call that the 4 corners of research writing. And this is like a guide that I wrote myself, and it's we've been using it as basically a textbook this semester. So we will revisit that as we go. I mention that because here Eugene is clearly opening with the stakes. Oh, I guess here he's shifting into kind of the framing and then the turn of the research gap. And then this is kind of previewing the implications. And now here he's into the evidence. And here, boom, I show that user trust does not increase as a function of time. And I also show, so this is kind of his second part that goes into technological feasibility. This is fantastic. I will include my snippet here because this will still be true, even though this is a really well done. This does a good job using the 4 corners. And then this is a concept that we talked about in class, which is that the sociology of research articles means they're usually not free for people, and so the abstract is part of the free thing. So this is kind of a chance for me to get this out to Eugene. Yeah, and expect to update this. He is already making what I would call a second thesis move by coining his own term here. So I'm going to, from the scholarly field that's informing your paper, and I'm just going to kind of lightly tweak this. I hope the question mark exclamation point isn't too strong, but it just goes back to this theme of probably the biggest thing that we're going to be thinking about together is what discipline Eugene is contributing to in this. And the idea behind that is that Eugene could take this project potentially beyond just a classroom thing to turn in for a grade. That's on my radar, especially because he's pulling from Unit 2. When students have done that in the past, I have sometimes had them submit to a scholarly conference. All right, and here we go. We can see he's using kind of the numbering format for his headers, which is fine. In fact, that is very standard within HCI as a field. And he's kindly saying this has been largely transferred from what he wrote before. I'm going to acknowledge that. Thanks for letting me know. What do I have to say about this? I'll put more readerly energy into the literature review because honestly that is kind of where that's going to go. So here we're opening with some general sense of stakes, yeah. And here he's going to have his new summary. So you can see this is very early stages. I try to meet students essentially where they're at. So like, all right, I'm not going to like pick at him about this. He has already put an immense amount of work into this project so far. So I think it would be really counterproductive. I appreciate that he is being straightforward about this and would not want to kind of pick on him about that. And it might change traffic laws and so on. And great, that's good. He and I have worked on that in Unit 2. Yeah, and here he's saying, look, I'll include this, but this is probably going to shift a little bit. And this is actually what I'm most interested in, so yeah, we'll see. All right, and now you can see he's up, I wonder if he actually changed this or not. 2 data sets. And I will pick at him about this. It would have been nice to see the updated version here so I can get a sense of the data you've collected. Because that's kind of a small, text level thing. All right, great. And so I'm not going to pay too much attention to this because this is, kind of moving on its own. What I will say is I think I have a snippet here. Yep. And this is something that I do sometimes in my commenting, which is I haven't had time to discuss something in class, but it is easy to incorporate And I think sometimes students use these comments to create a kind of checklist for themselves. I sometimes see a little bit of evidence for that. And so I want this to be on their checklist. So basically, now that these papers are so long, I'm going to recommend to Eugene that he previews the rest of this paper. Wow, and he's saying this has also been transferred from R2. Interesting, huh? So this is a bit disappointing here. Okay, good. And this is I'm really glad that he is making this choice. Before, he was making a kind of overly strong statement. I mean, it was reasonable for our context, but it was overly strong if he was still making this, that, oh, scholars are assuming that user trust increases over time. And here he's backing off from this, I think, because I commented on that in his pre-draft. So I think this is an outcome of my commenting from before. He wants to extend this to how other scholars approach the issue of analyzing trust. There hasn't been a user trust analysis from tweets over a given period of time. So this is kind of a narrower, and I'm going to comment here. Okay, I hear that. I mean, I want to acknowledge that he has a new plan and kind of be supportive here. And help talk through the pros and cons. This is narrower, but probably more supportable than what was in the R2. From tweets over a given period of time. I'm going to modify this here. Narrower framing and turn. So I basically name these as two moves to create this effect of a research gap, but probably more supportable. So I'm affirming that user trust of tweets over a given period of time. I wasn't expecting him to go this direction, so I'm trying to think of, I probably won't say anything here. I think I'm just going to wait it out. I mean, I've already commented. He knows from above that I was hoping for some kind of extended thing, so I'm going to just wait for my response letter at this point. All right, and now we're into the background. At this point, these are kind of template style headers. But yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure this is maybe a copy and paste job from his pre-draft, which is great. That is my whole goal of designing the pre-drafts the way I do, is, look, you can't draft 3,200-ish words in a couple of days. Let's build up to it bit by bit. So I'm, happy if he did the pre-draft in a way where it's going to really build in here. All right, and he has this nice transition phrase in order to do this. Web scraping of Twitter tweets. Yeah, I think this does make sense as his background, because in a way this is what we need to know about his source of evidence. So now he's giving us some background on Twitter, and I'm just going to wait it out here. Yeah, this is going to be I have a snippet here that part of the function of the background is not just to give us enough to understand the evidence, but it's also to slide in the stakes. And I'm going to add here, you might quantify its popularity. Yeah, because he gives more detail about the debate itself. And so he's giving us some detail here. I'm deciding whether to kind of suggest adding more here, or maybe just kind of Okay, so now he's moving into trying to give us heuristic sense of why Twitter. Like, what's the value here? And so he's basically saying we can view it as consumers. Okay, so in fact, I'm going to synthesize that well. And then he adds a second piece here, which is that, oh, well, maybe this is societal tolerance and approval. These are a nice way to make the use of Twitter explicit and give readers intuition on why it could be useful. So I'm doing a little bit of affirmation there, and then I have kind of a thought for Eugene. I'll share it with you now, which is that I think his analysis is a little unfocused because user trust is very individualized, but holistic technological blah, 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 and his analysis of tweets in aggregate is getting at something more corporate. For instance, overall societal tolerance, what consumers, basically consumer trust. And I suspect I'm going to ask him, suggest to him that he kind of refine, elaborate here. So I want to kind of lay the groundwork for this here. I suspect that concepts like consumer trust, societal tolerance, societal approval, and I'm going to put it as can be refined. That means I think you stumbled into it, and let's try to be a little bit more intentional in this and really helpful. Can be refined and be really helpful in describing your approach. All right. Yeah, and now here he's still going on into this. That's just really so well done. Okay. This is great detail. Expect to add citations to bring more specificity to some of the claims. So I'm kind of just adding on there that it's not just about this sentence, it's kind of about this whole first part of that paragraph that I'm really prompting him for. All right, so now we're into the methodology. Overarching methodology. 2 guiding principles. Okay. Overall tone and original content. These are really, again, it's great that he's trying to do this. And here he's getting at some of these things that I was thinking about above. So he says, look, well, if you have original content, maybe it's not exactly the same as above. Less effort and deliberation versus kind of this original content. Chiefly concerned. 3 distinct processes. So he's kind of inventing his own terminology here just because that's to draw out his intuition. And I want to comment on that. I'm trying to figure out where would be the best. I think I'm going to say here, it sounds like you have an implicit theory of I'll call it working theory because it's not even really implicit. He's making it explicit. A working theory of what is important on Twitter. Let's try to offload that to existing scholarship so that it feels more grounded. This is going to be a core thing that I think is going to come up in my letter. It's probably going to be the main thing that I focus on, actually. And this concept of offloading is something that I talk about related to kind of it's in our textbook, so I will probably reference that here. In other words, he's just making this up, and it's plausible, but it's going to feel so much stronger if he says, such and such scholar says that, you know, Twitter discourse operates in 4 different ways, and so on. Okay, so he's trying to get into his method, and he says, look, we're going to do 3 different processes. And here, honestly, I'm going to... I know that he wrote his own sentiment analysis, so when we get to phase 2, and I think he must have... did he do his own web scraping? Oh, yeah. I don't know if you would call that icy, so he did do some scraping. Interesting. Very interesting. About any limitations of these third-party elements? I had thought actually that that was true, that the API only gives you 7 days, and he said, no, I found other things. So I guess he found them through using a different thing. Okay, Tesla reviews and autonomous vehicles. So this is his big difference from what we did in Unit 2. I had done a search on Tesla and safety, like it had to have, the tweet had to have both those words. And I gave one in 2019, I think, and one from 2021. And basically, Eugene analyzed just those 2, but they were like 2,000 each. Yeah, and here he's doing 1,000 per month. Great. And so that's going to give him little analysis of 24,000 tweets for this project. And let's celebrate that here. Oh man, this is the kind of thing where when I tell my friends and other people in my life, like, oh yeah, and then I had to, you know, grade student papers, one of them was analyzing 24,000 tweets. People just say like, what? Yeah, so you can see, I mean, Eugene's a fantastic student. I'm really excited to be working with him. It's just super fun. So he is able to do this. I actually would have like kind of tried to hold him back a little bit more, except he's already done the analysis on the smaller data sets of the 2,000 that I had given him in Unit 2. So this would have been too much, and it's because, in fact, maybe I'll say that here. Nice job using Unit 2 to pilot this data collection and basically analysis. And I'm going to say this would have been overkill right now if you hadn't already done that work. Okay, and now he's justifying these, and it is different than what I had done. In fact, Tesla reviews, it's not to strictly assess user trust, but to assess all contributing factors. And this is, oops, I've switched up my keyboard shortcut for making a note. Okay, here we go. This is where I'm filling in from the basically imaginary, maybe I'll even just put that research gap. And I'm just going to remind him here that this idea of, well, I want to find all contributing factors, this is kind of an interesting case in point where, like, I guess that's interesting. He needs to work earlier in the paper in that literature review to show us that this is needed. So let's kind of remind him of just why the literature review is so important there. Really need to do a lot of detailed work to show why this is important for scholars to identify. So the detailed work is kind of like a subtle, hopefully relatively subtle reminder, like, wow, the literature review not being here is, That puts a lot of pressure on you in the future. I'm not worried about Eugene, but this is, all right. User sentiment was developed, and this is hiding him in there. Yes, I see. High volume of hashtags and emojis in tweets. Yes. This is a really big challenge because the encoding of emojis and the weird non-spacing, basically, of hashtags makes it very challenging to programmatically go through. And I'm going to offer him, rather than just like sympathizing with this, I'm at least going to push him towards something. So one idea is to manually look through your data set for some common emojis and do searches to try to quantify, but also get a sense of where and how those are playing out. Do they generally affirm the text, or are they creating a whole new, sometimes sarcastic take on the text? That would be challenging. Right? In other words, if he is trying to programmatically say, well, this is a positive tweet, but the thing that he wrote is not actually able to do emojis, then if emojis are being used to give a different sense of the text, then his, even if he wrote the most beautiful text sentiment analysis software, we're still not going to have the right kind of thing. So I am not kind of worried about this. He's textually doing a great job. And, oh, he added proprietary. That's fun. Yeah, he's doing the work, you know, and in a way this is going to be distracting if I emphasize too much of this. So this is probably a difference between, say, this writing class and other things that that students are trained in the process of kind of scientific academic research writing, which is that I do care about his methods, you know, you can see, but I also kind of don't. He's doing the best he can. Okay, he also did keyword extraction. And he's kind of describing this. So overall, I mean, overall this looks good. Feels natural. You know, the big thing, again, kind of comes back to like, what is he going to analyze this for? And we are about to discover this because he's, you know, building toward his analysis. I will say, what do I want to say here? I mean, basically, as he's describing his method, well, I'm already encouraging more scholarship here. I think I'm just going to stick with that. One of the things that's generally on my mind when commenting student papers is that, you know, as you can see, this is not so much about this is wrong, you need to fix it, or I intend for it to be rarely about that. It's much more a process of joining students. Here's where I see you going. Here's what's working well. Here's what's not working as well right now. Let's try to kind of debug it together. Involved in that is I need to prioritize. If a student sees something where every sentence or even every paragraph has another comment, another suggestion, another action item, it can just really get overwhelming, and counterintuitively it becomes more, the comments become more of a checklist. I want to keep my comments sparse enough that Eugene needs to like create his own sense of what's his revision plan. So we'll probably do that in class, actually, is give students some time. All right, and so now he's following up on that idea of tone. And so basically he's trying to say keyword extraction is how he's going to measure tone. Okay, sure. And then all this stuff sounds fine. Linear regression, blah, blah, blah. I do want to say capitalize figure in the text, e.g. figure 2. All right, and now he did the same thing for only original tweets, right? So he's kind of following up on his two-part thing. So this is really nicely organized. I sought to determine factors that cause user trust and perception to either increase or decrease. Oh, I realized I had a thought for him when we're talking about increase or decrease. And I need to come back here to his background, Twitter, and we're going to add a section because I think you'll want a subsection on Tesla. Obviously, a bit of background on what they're doing and how they fit into the AV landscape, but also give us some intuition. Well, the reason I didn't think about this is earlier is he's kind of in the process of shifting his research gap. With his former one, I had this in the back of my mind. I think I'm still going to say it. Also give us some intuition about why we might think that user trust, or basically kind of like confidence, would increase or would be increasing over time. So for instance, stock price, features added, shipped, honestly even just promised, etc. In other words, I should add this here. This will give readers, this will add suspense so that your analysis is a bit more surprising. And I'll say maybe findings. To emphasize here that like you have some choice in how you tell this research story, and if you tell it in a way where it's like, wow, Tesla's doing so well, we might think that things are increasing. I've already seen his chart, you know, from his one of his pre-drafts. So I know that it does not increase, and we read that above. So we know that's where he's going to go with this, and now build up some tension here so that that doesn't feel just like, oh yeah, cool, I guess. All right, now we come back here, monthly intervals, separate keyword extraction. All right, sure. I mean, that this all feels kind of well justified. I don't think I have any snippets related to kind of method stuff. Yeah, I basically don't have any more snippets until we get to the conclusion. So this is an example where, quote unquote, I'm looking at the PDF. You know, in this case, Word separated this out into a different line. Let's see, where's the other? Oh, well, it looks actually more or less the same, so that's nice. I asked students for a Word version because I can comment very easily, but Word is crazy and sometimes will just really mess up the formatting. Illustrates initial keyword extraction. So this comes straight out of his pre-draft, I think. And I'm not sure what are we supposed to see out of this? Initial keyword extraction. What's the insight from this? That people are generally positive because there's only one negative keyword? Or what? Is it that people are tuned to safety? and I would say maybe 2 out of the 4 are safety related. And here's going to be my general insight that's going to kind of percolate through this. I mean, clearly this is an early version, and so I want to just say make sure to use the organization of these findings strategically. And I think that's all I'll say for now. All right, and now here we go. We have overall tone. Neutral sentiment. One of my... Oh, I see. He's trying not to give us insights here because he wants to call this the results. Let me check and see, is he separating the discussion out into a special section? Yes, he is. Okay. So I'm going to revise this then. For now, I'm going to just delete the comment. I do have the text pasted. If you want to separate the kind of insights into the discussion section, it's more typical to call this findings. Is that true? Oh, results, that's what I meant. Then we're not waiting and wondering what insights we've missed here, which is basically what I was just doing. Something that, you know, is coming up now and repeatedly is just really trying to spell out what is the effect on readers. So, you know, sometimes that's what my little snippets are doing. We're clearly running, I have no idea how long time is going, but this is lengthy, right? And a little bit more explanation just goes so far. So that's a really important aspect to me of commenting. I would rather make fewer comments but have them be kind of rich than the opposite. All right, and so now we have all of these, and I can more or less kind of skip through these. I mean, he showed us these in class, these 2 charts, and that's super fun, super cool, right? Let's look through them. Each month is on its own kind of axis, its own part on the x-axis, and then sentiment as measured by his custom aspect gathered across all the tweets, and you can see it's just wild. It's all over the place. There's positive, there's negative, and so on. We need to remember in his discussion section to ask him to key these to public events, because, for instance, you would expect that something really cool happened to Tesla at month 0 compared to month 8 or 9, maybe 9, where average sentiment was extremely low, right? Because that's going to be a rival interpretation here. Is that, well, it's not so much about trust, it's basically just that things are really messy, you know, and different news comes out. Substantial variation, right? That's a nice kind of academic way to say this is just wildly up and down. High variation, volatile, yes. And good, he's even including here the change in sentiments in the most 3 volatile months. And so that I don't forget, I'm going to even say in the discussion, or maybe method, it would be nice to hear, oh, you know, honestly, this could go in the background, maybe. It would be nice to hear what public events, if any, are happening that would explain these wild shifts. Especially if some of those are, basically whether those are in Tesla's control or not. In other words, like, yeah, I'm not sure which one would be kind of more interesting to see as a reader, but great. All right, so he's kind of done some filtering, and now keywords before filter, after filter. There's really no difference. Oh, it's not meant to be figure 1 excluded trivial keywords. I don't fully follow this, but I don't think I really need to. Let's see where he discusses figure 5. I hope we didn't miss it. Figure 4. And in the text, I'm looking for him to describe, but we've jumped now to figure 6, right? I'm not that worried about it. It should go in order, but that's kind of a revision aspect. And here we're getting kind of a duplicated type of thing. Wow, and now we have something else, figure 7. I'm going to maybe just kind of comment at the last bit of text here. There's a lot going on in these, and the repetition isn't fully clear how it's going to pay off or even what's being repeated. What's my kind of action item that would come off of this? Expect these to be refined as you reorganize the results. And maybe use subsections to guide us. I think that's enough for now. Now we're finally into the discussion, so that's going to be great. What we're expecting out of this is all of his insights. In fact, I'll say, because, you know, kind of structurally. If other students did this a lot, I would probably add this comment as a new kind of text snippet. Maybe I'll do that just for the sake of it. As readers, we're now expecting to see a dense and really nuanced explanation of your thesis first, then discussion of the theoretical implications. Curious to see if there are any here, since the lit review is incomplete. All right, and I will paste this in as a new kind of snippet for ourselves. And I'm leaving the future tense here, curious to see, like, as though I haven't seen it. I really haven't seen it, right? I mean, we're going through it. I try to comment on these more or less in order, and in order to kind of describe the process of it. Initial preliminary, yeah, so now we're getting it, right? Shows on first appearance, overwhelmingly overall positive sentiment. Great, so we did kind of pick up on one possible story. While the frequency of negative shows some level, the overwhelming illustrate positive sentiment. And now, give us a bit more drama. I think this is a contrast to the insight above. So maybe, however, would be appropriate. And in fact, instead of just leaving this as the advice, I want to contextualize it as the function. Use transitions to give us a bit more drama. And that kind of is a little bit more general, right? It's something ideally Eugene would be able to take away, that transitions are not just to help flow, they also kind of build and release drama. So, you know, he's, I think, going for, look, overall things look super positive, but it actually looks kind of random. So, time and user sentiment. Okay, so notice, yeah, okay, let's keep going. Filtering out retweets. And so basically he does the same thing, right? And that's where we saw some of the repeated stuff. Yep, and the correlation is weak at best. Oops, where am I? So let's go back into this, and I want to affirm right in the sense of, yeah, I'm totally tracking with him. I'm wondering if there's a way to make the visuals show this story a little bit more. one idea would be to put the linear regression line in dashes. Dashes, hyphens, basically to show that it's, kind of more or less hazy. It's hypothetical. Provisional. What's the right word here? If you solid versus dashes to show that it's not that. A little bit, we'll go for murky. Currently that wouldn't work because you're already using dashes to separate positive, negative sentiment. So play around with it. In other words, again, I don't know the right answer here. I'm going to tell Eugene what I'm reading, and it's on him. He gets to figure out what's the best answer. All right, and now we're going to get to more insights. Awesome. Sentiment for the same months drastically changed. Interesting. I didn't notice that. That wasn't apparent from the figures above. Maybe revise. So again, notice that here what I'm doing is I'm trying to map his textual kind of research findings, story you might call it, with his visuals. And it's really important that the visuals show the same story. In fact, I'll even add that here, maybe revise, so that readers who are skimming the visuals still get the same high quality insights. Right? I mean, it's a good insight. You just want to carry it through so that it's also represented visually. And now he's pitching this as a result. I see. And it's not, and keywords and topics didn't, I see. So I think maybe that figure 5 that we were noticing, now I see why it was there. Kind of. It's that there weren't that different of keywords. Had substantial growth rates. Growth factor. Is this defined somewhere? I saw it in the chart, but wasn't sure what it meant. And in this context, here I've kind of lost the thread of the argument. Yeah, I have. And this will be something where when we meet together, he'll just probably explain it, because likely if I'm unsure on it, some of his classmates as well who will meet in a small group will say, what was that for? Okay, he's eventually drifting. AV sentiment is not solely dependent on news. This is important and should probably be developed in tandem with what we would expect from Tesla. See my note above about giving us more intuition on that. In other words, I don't think that this comment of his is disagreeing with that. I think he's saying, yeah, this is somebody, I feel like overall we're kind of losing the thread here. Notice also that we haven't gotten at all to the holistic such and such. Analyzing change in variations. All right, and I'm going to even comment here. Notice that there are several insights still on the table. First, we've lost the thread about holistic whatever. Second, we'll be looking for an extended and I'm going to say nuanced again. I hope, that's all right. I'm fine being repetitious. Look for an extended and nuanced discussion of how this relates to what other scholars would expect. How does this play into their expectations for factors that determine trust? Right? Obviously, they're not mentioning David Dobrik particularly, such as American accomplishment. Is the main finding here then that technological developments have an important piece? That feels honestly a little bit boring. Yeah, of course the media has an effect on how people view things, especially since Twitter is the media in a significant way, especially when Eugene's measuring it this way. So this is a little bit disappointing. It means that it's harder for me to comment in a helpful way for Eugene. There's just so much kind of work to be done here. Remember to include references. I'm going to put it in order. Acknowledgements, the Princeton, I don't even know what it's called, Code of Conduct, plagiarism statement, I think honor code statement. So even if they aren't complete, basically. I mean, in the same way that I'm happy he put the title conclusion, I want him to do the same thing. I don't think he included it. Sometimes students do after their letter. Yeah, no, he doesn't. Oh, a fun aspect here is, yeah, I do ask students. He didn't just kind of invent this. It's part of my prompt to say, where are you? What time is it? I think I forget some of the prompt here. It's all right. All right, let's keep going. All right, so before we take a break and do the letter, I need to, myself kind of, I want to unbold this and I will insert page break, dear Eugene. I'm going to just kind of lay out my own plans for it. Thanks. This interesting paper in progress. I mean, this one is honestly pretty incomplete relative to where it's trying to head. All right, and now I want to map out what I want to say. A lot of what I have to say has to do with the evidence. So I group these based on the four corners of research writing that we use as shared vocabulary. So we're going to have evidence, we're going to have thesis, we're going to have stakes, we're going to have research gap. The evidence, in my mind, that encompasses everything about his methodology, about the data he's actually gathering, about his analysis. So a big point will be offloading the tone versus, I think he called it content or something like that. Then another big piece is, I guess I would call it structuring the visual forms of evidence. That's probably the big ones for now. The thesis is a huge category in this case. What happened to the holistic, I guess I should look it up, technological feasibility. And here is going to be a concept that I have in the back of my mind, which is offloading tone versus content. Maybe upgrade the conceptual use of this as well. Public discourse, etc. Or justified. I also make my comments blue, so that way it's visually separated. In the same way that they're expected to write more or less a page cover letter, all the writing seminar instructors are also expected to create more or less a page of a response letter. So what happened to that? I think there's going to be a connection here. Honestly, even just factors. Like, what were the factors that he mentioned? He eventually got to, well, the media relates. Like, okay, sure. I almost always group these into 2 or 3. So far, I haven't seen any kind of natural groupings. I'm hesitant to group these 2 because that might be like too much. So I think I'm going to put, well, I might group this with stakes here because give the people what they want. Like, take us back here to what the conclusion is. These are just my notes. I don't think most of this language will survive. All right, and then finally the research gap. Huge missing piece. Didn't even get a version from pre-draft 3.3. I mean, he was building some of that out. He had like 10 references, and we didn't see any of that. So he just ran out of time, you know. And then, unfortunately, we won't really be able to get to what discipline is this in. You know, we don't have any scholarship, so how are we going to talk about disciplinary conventions and goals? And what this means, I had been thinking about suggesting to Eugene as kind of like a PS, like, hey, let's talk about your goals with the project and see, are you interested in taking this beyond the scope of this course? Because it's so unfinished right now, I will not include that now. You know, and what that means is that if I do include it, it would be in his revised version. It's the very end of the semester. Usually students are too tired to like take on some new ambitious thing by that point. So that's okay. You know, this will probably kind of end with this class. I'm totally okay with that. All right, so this is my outline for myself. It's about this point that I usually take a break. 5-10 minutes is my goal. You know, check my phone, watch some TikToks, relax, fold some laundry, eat a snack, have some more coffee. So let's take a break and get back into the letter writing in a few minutes. And we're back. So we have this plan for the response letter for Eugene, and you may be saying to yourself, this is already a ridiculous amount of feedback. How are we going to give any more? Let's dive into that for just a minute before we get into this. There are a few different ways that I have for thinking about just how much feedback we offer to students in the Princeton Writing program. The first way to think about it has to do with kind of just comparing straight textual expectations. So when I taught at CMU, which has a very kind of, you know, reasonable, well-run writing program that does a similar research writing curriculum, I would be expected to give way fewer comments than I did there. And these little like self notes here, some of which, you know, I would just kind of bullet point those and be done now, you know. And I would say, let's talk about these when we meet. So that would kind of offload that to the other element. So, you know, you can, instead of thinking of it as being 2 pieces, you would more or less shrink that down to just 1. or I guess the other way to put it would be, instead of just having that one piece at the writing program, we have elaborated that into two. The other aspect is, how long is this in-person small group meeting? And when I was at CMU, the expectation was about 15 minutes. And at Princeton, that is doubled for these later meetings, and it's tripled for the first meeting. So the first time that I meet with each student, it's one-on-one, and that's 45 minutes, one-on-one, outside of class. So that is one way of thinking about how much kind of commenting happens here, which is like 2 to 3 times as much. You could also, here's another kind of way of thinking about how much feedback happens at like a very quantitative level, which is that if you're at a typical research-based institution, a teaching-based faculty load is to teach 4 courses each semester. And if you get, if you teach less, you're expected to do research on the side. So you could think of 4 classes as being the standard. And at Princeton, I have 100% of my obligation to Princeton being out of teaching 2 sections. So already we're at 50%, or like doubled, kind of the typical attention that you would have, because I'm spending 100% of my attention on just 2 sections compared to 4. The other thing is class size, how many people are in each of these sections. And at a typical school, I mean, you're always looking to have a small class size, especially in a writing class, and sometimes that is relatively successful, maybe 19, 20 students in one section. So for the sake of convenience, we're going to call it 24, because the typical, the cap at Princeton is 12. So Eugene is one of 12 students in his section. I have one other section also with, well, if it wasn't COVID, we would have 12. Right now it's 10 and 12, so it balances to 11 and 11. So it's a little reduced because of COVID, but you can kind of fudge the calculations a little bit and say that doubles it again. So basically, each student in my section, in my class, every semester, anyone in the writing seminar program gets roughly 4 times the amount of kind of instructor attention to their writing that you would get even at a really well done writing program at a research-based school if they're following kind of a more or less similar curriculum. So I don't know of any program that expects the same level of attention as we have at Princeton. It makes it really fun. It does make it, a little bit tiring. I mean, I had to take a break halfway through one. The other aspect here is that if we look back at our calendar, I don't do the commenting and letter just on the drafts. That would already be 3 times through the course of the semester. I actually also do it for the revisions. The only difference is that at the end of the letter, there is an extra line that says, balancing the strengths and weaknesses, this paper earns a grade of blank, and it's a letter grade. That's the only difference. So I go through this process 6 times for every student every semester. And that makes it really fun. It makes it, students can then improve just a dramatic amount. And students who are already advanced can take things that much more advanced. Eugene, you can probably infer here, is a very advanced student, definitely in the top half. He's kind of created a lot of this methodology himself. There's a reason I was confused, and it's because he made it up. Like, of course, it's going to be, kind of part of a process. So, yeah, he's also, very, resilient, responsive. I'm not kind of worried about his performance on this project or kind of the whole semester. Have anything else I want to say? I guess the main thing else that I wanted to say about this letter is this response letter, it's always in progress for me of what is it kind of doing for students. If Eugene has left his response video, I'm going to watch it too, because I'm curious to see how students actually respond to it. A lot of times, honestly, what I want it to function as is my own agenda. Like if I was revising it myself, here are the big things I would look at. I think the fact that it's not structured as a list kind of hides that a little bit. I don't know, it's a mixed thing. Especially for Eugene, I mean, all of these are things that we already commented on. So in a way, this is just drawing out the big elements. What that means, by the same token, is that the tone that I take in this is, in my mind, one of the most important pieces. So I'm looking to maintain like an encouraging tone toward Eugene, one that is not like judgmental or kind of critical of where it is not in this case. One that is very clear about some next steps without sounding like I'm the gatekeeper who you shall not pass type of thing. So those are some of my big goals. It does make it very like emotionally demanding. Writing these letters is just like taxing. I mean, you maintain this kind of tone and vibe through all of the comments. And then you get to, all right, I'm going to write a letter that summarizes a lot of that same stuff. My first year teaching at the Princeton Writing program, that was by far the most challenging part, was maintaining this stance for kind of like such an extended amount. I think the payoff is then, students have that. Hopefully, I think it's useful to them, particularly toward the end of the semester where we are now. We will be meeting in small groups. So the typical setup is that there are 3 people in this small group. So when I meet with Eugene, it'll be me and Eugene and 2 of his classmates. And each one of them will still be kind of allocated about half an hour, but it's not just me. And in fact, the idea is that I'm kind of gradually fading off into the distance. And so in a way, this letter is kind of my chance to say my piece, so that I can just hang out and kind of be a little bit more casual when we're all talking together. And if he wants to pull on a thread or discuss something, that sounds great. And if he has other things on his mind, then I can kind of feel fine. I'm not holding something back, waiting secretly for him to bring something up. Yeah. Great. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is going back to just how much time do we spend. I mean, a less formal way of calculating this is I don't think I ever got this amount of feedback until I turned in my final dissertation and received this amount of feedback on the final version of each chapter. That was an overwhelming process. So some people it's rare to ever get this amount of attention. And it's something that I encourage students to kind of, value to the extent that they can. All right, let's get into this. My broad approach here in the introductory kind of paragraph is to repeat back to them what they're doing. This models the same thing that they were doing in their cover letter, where they say, here's what my paper is doing. So it's a chance for me to say, I hear you, I see you, this is what I'm pulling out of it. The paper analyzes 24,000, and I'm just gonna kind of give a little reminder there of how impressive that is. Analyzes 24,000 tweets from the last 2 years about Tesla to see how user opinion, he calls it user sentiment, user trust. I'll just kind of phrase it as user opinion here. User opinion on AVs, although we kind of lost that. In my summary, I try to give kind of the best version, most precise version of what I see them doing. Tweets from the last 2 years about Tesla to see how user opinion on AVs has shifted, if at all. The paper, intriguingly, finds that it hasn't shifted overall, but that there's high volatility. And then I'm also going to indicate there are also some intriguing, well, I won't use intriguing again. Maybe I'll just leave this for now. All right, so that's my little summary. I have developed kind of an extended text snippet for this part of where we're at. Oh, you know, sometimes my text snippets remind me what I want to say to students. I think he has a sense of where his conclusion needs to go, so I don't think I need to say that. All right. And now, keyboard shortcut, Command Option Shift V, paste it in without formatting, so I didn't have to worry about the difference here. You can see this is a sans serif font, this is a serif font, but it just pasted in the right way. And this says, congratulations on putting together a complete project based on your own research proposal. I mean, that's the big step here, and so that's part of why this is my snippet. I want to say the same thing to each of the students here who is getting this. Main thing is, I'm going to say most of the trappings of an academic article. There's a title and abstract, a complete introduction-ish, a literature review to be completed. I mean, honestly, his is not much of this, but I want to affirm that this is where we're heading. There is detailed consideration. There's multiple sections to elaborate on this. A conclusion heading. And there will be a references list. While there's still a long road ahead, there's a great milestone. So true. Academic writing does not have enough celebration moments, and I get the role. I get to just say, hey, let's celebrate now. Great draft. Below are my most important suggestions that offer ideas based on my comments above and suggest topics for us to discuss when we meet. So I'm not trying to hide what my letter is doing. This is the best I have to describe, like, what are we trying to do here? I'm trying to give you suggestions and discussion topics. And I've organized them around our shared terminology here. So let's visit that briefly, just so you all have a sense of where this is heading. So again, this is something I wrote. It functions as kind of our textbook. It's a guide to research writing. And there are detailed chapters related to each of these concepts. So I will, at points, kind of pull from this. In fact, the one I know that I want to do is about offloading evidence, which, because that's in the offloading methodological decisions, and I know that's in the evidence chapter. If I remember right, it is a little part that is part of the overview here. So the overview is structured to, of each of these chapters is structured to be based on different real publications. And so here we are, unpack evidence and building blocks. Well, maybe I was wrong. In fact, I was sure it was in here. Page 56. I was right. It's just not highlighted. It was one of those things when I was writing it, I didn't realize how central it would be. All right, so there we go. I'm going to reference that, and that gives you just kind of a sample of what we're working with. All right, so let's come back to this, and now we have kind of this extended opening. We're going to highlight these headers, and let's flesh this out. So my structure here for each of these follows what has been called the Harvard model of commenting, which is you say the principle, you apply it, and then you say what's that good for. So here I have kind of some text snippets, and these are intentionally repetitive. I use basically the same thing. I tell students, like, look, I'm just going to be saying the same stuff. So what are we thinking about? Evidence is everything that is used to arrive at a thesis. Great. All right. And now I want to affirm Eugene. This paper has done a lot of offstage work to gather and process the data. Way to go. So this is a concept that we've talked about through the semester. That, I mean, we didn't see, you know, the hours of him getting access to the Twitter API, figuring out how to download just 1,000. Oh wait, the Twitter API doesn't go past 7 days. I need to find a new tool. I need to install that tool. I need to ask it for 1,000. I need to put it in an Excel spreadsheet probably somewhere. I need to process that data. Like, none of that is in the text, but it's all required. It's kind of underneath. It's offstage work. That concept, I think, is really helpful. Because it affirms. Yeah, I mean, there's not much, in a way, here to see because you've done so much to lay the groundwork for it. All right, way to go. Some of the biggest ways, oops, that you'll want to upgrade the paper's evidence. And now you'll notice that I have a small shift here. I'm going to really intentionally shift into this like kind of fictional way of talking about Eugene's work as the paper, so like the paper's evidence, as though the paper was kind of a real thing. It's a little bit of an awkward convention, but it really helps separate Eugene and how he is and who he is as a person from like what's the paper doing. So it's not Eugene's evidence, it's the paper's evidence. And you'll see I kind of use this intentionally throughout the whole letter. I don't know if he notices or cares. I think some students probably do, but it's an important aspect because I really want to show students they put so much effort into this class. I mean, one of the requirements, one of the prompts for the cover letter, Eugene didn't really mention it in his, is like, how much time have you spent on this? It's kind of a chance for them to brag about that a little bit or just to kind of like pour it out. I mean, if I had to estimate, I think Eugene kind of ran out of time, so he probably didn't want to say what his timing was like, but you know, we're talking 20-ish hours at least just to get to this draft, maybe. And then in his case, that stacks onto what happened before. So yeah, I really want to emphasize, Eugene, you're doing great. You are not the sum of your textual output. Never get that confused. Some of the biggest ways that you will want to upgrade the paper's evidence how do I want to phrase this? Honestly, I have three things. This second one is the hardest one and the one that is least kind of prefaced by what I had. I'm going to maybe in my notes put that second. Maybe I'll change this. Two of the most straightforward, ways that you'll want to upgrade the paper's evidence include offloading the, now I see why I put that together. Okay, you can see I face a little bit of structural things in the midst of trying to get this into prose. If it was just bullet points, you know, then I'm done. I kind of want this to flow because I'm creating some sense of emphasis here. So I'm going to put the other one first. Include more clearly structuring the visual forms of evidence. Meaning, of course, is figures and tables. And offloading the methodological choice to separate retweets from original tweets. That's basically what he's doing, and you know, he gave those special names to it, and I want to encourage him to not have to start from scratch there. For an example, see page 56 of the Four Corners. And this is the first version of this Four Corners guide that I've created. So in subsequent, if there are subsequent versions, I might be able to make this kind of more user-friendly. But yeah, in the Fernandez case, so let's go back and look at it here. This one actually doesn't refer to other scholarship. When I was writing this, I was like, oh, that's cool. But I'm looking, this is not going to be a very good example for Eugene's case. Maybe I'll even contextualize that on how this happens in a paper's setup, usually by citing other scholars. And now I'm going to be able to get this third one in as like an offshoot of this. In fact, I'm wondering if maybe there's a conceptual upgrade available as well. Something at a term that gets at, oh, maybe I will instead put the stakes here. I think it might be a better stakes. Oops, I need to special paste. All right. A term that gets at the stakes of Twitter data more clearly. Instead of something essentially individual, like user trust, is your analysis getting at something more corporate, like public discourse or societal fears? And I phrased this as a question. I hope that's true, but like, hey, this is a thought for Eugene. If so, that would not only add to your anticipated research gap about analyzing tweets, because that's his new version, is like, oh, lots of scholarship has done stuff related to autonomous vehicles and trust, but nobody's looked at tweets. So maybe I'll be clearer here. That would not only add to your anticipated research gap, I'm going to separate these out. This is going to be too long. That would, I lost my if so. If so, that would add to your anticipated research gap, i.e. others have examined, well, i.e. you're not just studying the tweets, you're studying you'll notice I am slipping here in terms of your and your. I think I'm doing that because I'm thinking prospectively, and it kind of goes the opposite way. I don't want to talk about the paper's analysis that Eugene hasn't done yet. It's Eugene's analysis, so like, go for it. You're not just studying tweets, you're studying public discourse, or whatever. Yeah. It would also help you be on more solid footing. I think this is similar to the language that I used above, and that's fine. I'm trying to kind of recall that with your choices, since so much of your method is already, here I will switch this out. The paper's method is already custom and from scratch. Right? He doesn't need more. So to follow through here, we have like, what are these things? How is it going in his paper? And now I end each of these sections typically. Oh, I don't usually pair these, so I don't have my what a paper's evidence is clear, well organized, and thoroughly, I'll say maybe like grounded. Readers can rely on the conclusions that the paper comes to. Right? In other words, if I'm saying the evidence is what gets you to a thesis, then okay, why is it worth working on your evidence and taking all my advice, which is going to take him hours to do? I mean, like, this is not add a couple paragraphs, change the formatting, make sure that your is the right synonym, homonym. This is like, let's go back to the beginning here. Honestly, I've kind of hidden it and I'm fine with this because I'm okay with this part coming out more when we meet. But where this is going is, I don't know if that division between original tweets and retweets is either justified or the only one that he wants to make. And I have other ideas for him, but he's not in a stage in this draft where he can absorb those. It's going to be too much. I mean, this is already a lot. So, I'll wait. We'll see how the conference goes. If it comes to it, I'm sure I'll be able to kind of think of those on the fly. Great. And so the idea here is just to reaffirm, yeah, if you put the work in to adjust your evidence, meaning probably all of those pieces, it's going to pay off. Readers here can be like, oh yeah, I don't have to worry about Eugene's method and his actual analysis. I can focus in on the claims that he's coming to. So that's kind of the idea behind this structure. Let's do the same thing here. Again, my templates are failing me. Paper's thesis is its big picture. That's kind of how I typically define it. This paper has an awkwardly developed thesis in that there's already a first and second thesis move imported from the R2, right? Because his original was there's no change over time, and his analysis of this refined one has kind of confirmed that. And he said, look, people care about more than just the word trust. That was from his earlier one, and I'm going to call that holistic technological feasibility. But this paper's, and yeah, this is great, right? I don't want to say you have an awkwardly developed thesis, particularly on kind of negative evaluations. This way of framing it can be useful. In that, there's already a first and second thesis move imported, literally like copy-pasted from the R2, but this paper's analysis is developing new and only somewhat overlapping insights. I mean, what was that thing at the end where he says, look, the topic changes, but it doesn't, and media? It seemed like the paper was drifting, because I think he was probably just writing it, not quite in a panic, but I think he was busy. He told me he had a math test that day that he was finishing, and so on. It seemed like the paper was drifting into a conclusion, I'll say thesis, into a thesis move, something like public events. I mean, like, the media has an impact on people's opinion. That, which hasn't been set up in a way that I can understand why it's surprising or interesting. Right, and notice, again, I'm trying to take the blame here. I don't understand, and I'm putting this textually. It's not that this idea doesn't make any sense. It's that the paper has not contextualized it in a way where I know how to interpret it. So there's probably very harsh ways of putting some of these same ideas, and it's important to kind of interact with people who you're mentoring in a way where, you know, it's on their side. Was drifting into a thesis move, the paper, especially with, what was his name? David Dobrik, and that little part. People's opinion about Tesla, which I might actually change this. I'll say it directly and then back off, which doesn't currently feel, to me obviously, surprising or interesting. Maybe this is an element where it just hasn't been set up and contextualized, where the insight just hasn't been contextualized. By the way, I'm using a great keyboard shortcut, which is that command arrow, especially left and right, will take you to the end of that. So here you can see I keep kind of moving around, and I can, if I'm in the middle of a line, I can go back to the end of it by command right. Command left would take me all the way to the end. That's less useful to me here, but it can be used. Yeah, okay. But it, and I'll be honest, I'm going to introduce here, right, for him that I suspect he wasn't even sure exactly what he was finding. Or it was just something interesting that you discovered along the way, where it's him discovering it, so that's fine. Where that you discovered along the way, but we should talk about where you see the paper's big insights being. Readers lose track of, much nicer way than what happened, right? Readers lose track. Oh, and then here I'm going to use another keyboard shortcut. Well, keyboard shortcut because in the Mac it doesn't have a you know, forward backspace, so you have to do function delete. And there we go, I got rid of it. Lose track of holistic technological feasibility, and honestly, even lose track of factors for AVs as such. Right, because by the end, like we lost sight of that. It doesn't help that he didn't have a written out conclusion that would have kind of like run that together. This is something where if I really wanted to, I could slide in the research gap here, but since he doesn't have one, I really want that to visibly be something different here. Great. I want to kind of come back and reaffirm it's natural that in a revitalized project like this one, like going from the R2 to the D3, that some of the conclusions will shift and may feel murky for a little bit. So make sure to give this some thought. And now I'll have my recap. When a paper's thesis is nuanced and strong, usually I put deep. Nuanced and deep, readers can appreciate the insights that the paper offers. If this was, so our course is more or less a graduate level research writing course. It's not pitched that way explicitly, and you know, Eugene is a first-year undergraduate student. But if this was in a more explicit kind of publishing context, I would phrase this a little bit different, because the thesis, yeah, readers can appreciate the insights. That has as the endpoint people reading Eugene's paper, which for a freshman in college, like, whoa, I could imagine, I could take the perspective of someone reading my paper. That's kind of, I think, mind-blowing and a shift into having a genuine sense of audience enough. If I was working with people who had publication on their radar, I would note that people reading your paper is not ideally the endpoint. It's people citing your paper and basically helping it kind of live on. And from that perspective, having a nuanced, deep, and clear thesis allows readers to more easily cite your work. But that would feel kind of overblown if I say that to Eugene or to any of my, almost any of my students here. So great, all right, 2 down, 1 to go. Whew, I don't know if you're tired. I'm ready to be moving to the next one. All right. Here are my kind of fragments here. And I'll paste these in. Paper's research gap is how it shows that it contributes to existing scholarship. For your sake, let me detour kind of back to the research gap chapter just to show kind of a prototypical form. Here is what I call the framing. It's what other scholars have found. In this case, it's a very simple format of lumping like 5 different scholars into a general claim that they're all more or less moving toward. And then you have what I call the turn, which usually begins with a strong contrastive word, yet far fewer studies have sought to blank. And the idea is that there's a little parallelism between these two so that it creates the sense, a little bit of anxiety. Oh, if only scholars knew this extra part that we don't. It feels like it makes so much sense. So that's kind of what we're discussing here. How it shows that it contributes to existing scholarship. The R2, I mean, in a way, there's almost nothing to say here, right? But let's just kind of reiterate. The R2 had a very well-formed research gap that is probably unsustainable as you get a better sense of existing scholarship, right? And that's because. So the paper is doing a good move of indicating that there's a new framing and turn on the horizon. Unfortunately, and again, I'm not going to say you didn't write it, and that's pretty obvious. Unfortunately, readers don't see what that is here because the introduction and literature review are placeholders, right? They aren't even templates or incomplete. Honestly, it's just like I mean to write it. And this is one of those cases where this is honestly kind of typical of drafts in my section. Very ambitious analytic process, and the draft comes in, and I mean, if I wasn't narrating this, I'd be able to go through this much faster because there's nothing here. So, you know, there's not that much deep thought that I can offer because Eugene and I both know what his next step is, like write the section. And I think, you know, I wanted to signal like this is kind of a loss. I think I'm doing that with unfortunately. You know, unfortunately, it is what it is. So we're not going to be able to really think about discipline. I am going to say even a rough sense based on, well, no, I'm not. No, just leave him where he's at. I hope you'll bring this up in our small group so we can hear your progress and think with you on where this is heading. Clearly, as a whole corner of research writing, the paper, you know, hasn't found its place yet without a working research gap. I just want to highlight, like, this is basically the first thing. It's the last thing I put on my list, but it's the first thing he needs to work on. So I'm going to say this will dramatically influence your methodology, thesis, and maybe even stakes. So it's worth beginning this first so it can percolate through the rest of your paper. And here your paper is fine. Here's my ending snippet. When a paper's research gap is compelling, readers can see how the paper contributes. I'll add to existing scholarship. Because, right. All right, so, you know, in theory, I aim for these to be a page. We have kind of gone over a page. That depends on whatever font the student is working on and like whatever sizing I end up with and so on. Clearly I'm not worried kind of about the length per se. I also drafted a really long, drafted a really long opening for this go around, so that's adding stuff. But I just wanted to, you know, because he put so much effort into this, I wanted to match that level of effort. Yeah, all right, so winding down, this is very true. Overall, the paper has a lot of possibility, and I look forward to seeing how you take it further for the R3. We are almost there. That is an important reminder, since we're 2 weeks away from not just this being done, but from school being over. You know, it's been a long year for students because we've been online the whole time. Never met met Eugene face to face. He mentioned he's very tall, so like that would be cool to eventually meet Eugene face to face. And this is it. This is our process. So from here, I will keep commenting on other students. When I have finished those, I will send them off to everyone kind of in a blast. In class this week, students will be workshopping each other's papers. So Eugene's has already been workshopped in I think Unit 1 or Unit 2, and so he'll be kind of doing the workshopping this week in class, and then out of class at some point I'll meet with him and his group. If you skipped ahead to here, you know, there's not kind of a grade per se, because this is just the draft, and we set it up so that all of the letter grade falls onto the revision. This just carries a homework grade with it. So yes, in a way, Eugene did all of this for, you know, kind of a homework grade. I really try to downplay grading because of some of these kind of conflicts and things. I hope you had fun going through this with me. Let me know if you have any questions or want to talk. Hope you've enjoyed this. Hope Eugene enjoys it. I'm looking forward to seeing where he goes with this. I think it's going to be kind of dramatically finished. So that'll be super fun. All right. Signing off.